Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we continue our reading of The Lion Host. Tell him about the hive mind, Doug said. Fletcher sat still and waited. She had us all linked, Gus said, from the first. Remember how I said we felt like we had to obey her, didn't dare not, because what else might she do? And she was our only ticket back to human? Well, after a while, we didn't bother with reasons. We just had to obey her. We're scared not to. Clearly, Doug said dryly, a follower of Machiavelli. Better to be feared than loved. Give me Sun Tzu any time. The leader should be respected and loved. Yeah, not much love, Doug agreed. And she was a real looker, but she never used it on us or seemed to think about it at all. Her folks were the same. No carrots, just sticks. We weren't their type, Doug said, still dry. Scales and tails? No. Anyway, the main thing was we came running when she called. All of us, all at the same time. Even if you weren't there to hear the order, you'd just know and come, like she'd blown a dog whistle even you couldn't hear, but still obeyed. And the really hivey part, though, was now our moods were catching. We all got tired together. We all got excited together. If someone lost his temper with one of the little guys, the men around him would get angry too. They might get angry at him or at each other, not always at the little guy, but they'd all get angry. And if guys tried to keep their temper, other guys nearby would start to cool off too. And focus, holy crow, we'd go through hours of practice focused on it all the time, like Satori or flow, maybe. I gotta say, we learned fast. Hiving was a real help learning Sindarin, Doug said. Some guys would be learning Sindarin from the dogs, Faradhuar, the North dogs, but I bet you knew that. And the next guy to take a lesson wouldn't remember the first guy's lesson, but he'd be that much further along anyway. It would die down if we were calm and well rested. We could think clearly and privately. But even then, we couldn't lie to each other. We could mouth words but never be believed. But even calm and private, the link was working. We called it the hive mind. When, when you can't lie to each other and you feel together and are all in the same trouble together, you get really tight, even if you don't like everyone in the team. You understand me, sir? Fletcher nodded but said nothing. On the other hand, Doug went on, it made you wild for a scrap of privacy, and it screwed over your sense of time. You spent a lot of time dazed. Well, pro and con, it all went bust when she died. I have to say there's a lot about it I miss, but it was scary, creepy too, to look back on. Anyway, that's the hive mind, or it was, and it's why we felt weird about breaking up after she died. And after she died and the warlord let you go your ways? Well, he couldn't change us back. He said the shapecaster was one of her kin who had died in the hunt with her, and he couldn't send us back as we were. Not many wanted to try it, but he said that even if we did, it wouldn't work. The spell would misfire. No luck would take you to, no luck would take such as you back to Enarath, was what he said. Fletcher murmured, sundered. So, said Gus, he just said goodbye. Said we were honorable soldiers and had been cheated by his enemy, and he pitied us. But he said we knew how to hunt and fight and forage and knew a widespread language, so we were good to make our way across the worlds. And he hoped we would find homes and forms that pleased us. Then he just gave us directions to the next Iarda. He looked at Fletcher to see if he understood. We say zone, he answered. Gus nodded and continued. It was a day's hike east of his citadel. He spent some dogs with us. You'd think it was to monitor us, but I really think it was a courtesy just to make sure we didn't get lost. Mostly, anyway. The dogs were friendly enough. Then the land fell away in cliffs and clouds, and it looked like we must be on a big mesa. The dogs led us to a place where two standing stones marked the head of a path down into the rocks and mist. You could hear roaring, Doug put in, like the sea or a waterfall, constant. And Morcus, he was the lead dog, one of our old teachers, and I think that's why he got put in charge of us. Morcus said, "It is 2 days' careful march from Bariad Torgon to Gaerlad, and be careful. If you fall in, it will be long before you climb out. But you should meet no one on the road. There has been little traffic while we fought here. Farewell. Believe that I do wish you well." And suddenly I felt lonesome. You could hardly say this was home, but it was the nearest we had. I had. I'd lost the hive mind now, along with. Anyway, I understood Brett when he said, "I wish you were coming with us." And Morcus laughed, really a laugh, not much like a bark, and said, "You were good enemies, but not that good. Come again as friends someday." And that was it. We shouldered our packs and waved to the dogs and headed out. Fletcher took a notebook out of his pocket and wrote, "Bariad, Torgon, and Gaerlad," he asked. They nodded. "Ever see those written?" They shook their heads. "I guess it was 2 days," Gus went on. "We slept once in the middle. As we got further out, things got weirder. More wind, pulling the clouds around into loopy, twisty shapes. The mountains started looking melty and like the clouds, and gravity got bent. It would look uphill, but be downhill when you got there, or vice versa, and you'd get heavier and lighter. And the sky would get dark and show us stars, but different ones, or aurora, or just a web of light. And we never saw a sun or moon. From the way you're nodding, Captain, I guess that's pretty standard stuff for you." Fletcher nodded more distinctly. "Anyway, call it 2 days, and we follow the road into a gully in the middle of a squall. I bet you that squall is always there. And find ourselves walking out of mist into rocky hills with a proper sky over us and rolling green hills below and a little trail at our feet. We came to a bigger road with a little guardhouse at the. Fast forward," Doug cut in. "It's been 2 years, and we've marched and ridden and sailed from one zone to another. 5 passages, grand total. There are 20 of us left. We lost 3 in that fight, 2 stayed with the warlord, and we lost 2 in fights when we were enslaved. Haven't lost any since. We went on calling ourselves the Rauerhof because we had to call ourselves something, and that seemed to fit people's expectations. Big scaly taily guys, pretty shaggy by then, the lion host? Sure. And oh good, they're just looking for work. Nothing here, try down the road. Enerath? Heard of it in legends, that's all." Fletcher asked in a careful voice, "Did you ever have to turn to banditry?" Gus stood to attention while sitting. "No, sir, we did not. Kept our noses clean that way, at least. Got chased for poaching a few times, but a man's got to eat." Fletcher nodded and muttered, "Brave gamekeepers." The two spread carnivorous grins and chuckled. "We have wound up," said Doug, "working for the city of Huspahan. That's in this zone, west of here, at a river mouth." "I know of it," said Fletcher. "Free city-state, big trade center." "Yes, sir. We got there, all 20 of us, and got hired into the city guard. That was 8 months ago. We've been there longer than anywhere else. Lots of people speak Sindarin, and we're starting to learn the local language, harder without the hive mind. They take our looks more easily than most. There are people there who are walking silhouettes, and some bigger than us, and a lot smaller, and a couple of guys have dated local girls even. Sometimes they ask for volunteers to hire on as guards for their caravans. We just came in from a gig like that. Met bandits in the passes, and I lost this." He lifted his stump. "And what did people say you were?" "They asked what we were," Gus replied. "And we just said the Rauerhof. We couldn't ask. We couldn't say, 'Excuse us, we're a bunch of doofus soldier boys from a place with no magic. What have we been turned into?' Bad for our street cred. Captain, you're the first person we've dared ask." Fletcher thought he knew what street cred was from context, but he made a note to check with Carlin. "So we're asking," Doug said. He looked humbly into Fletcher's eyes and repeated, "Captain, we're a couple of doofus soldier boys from a place with no magic. What have we been turned into?" "And," Doug added, Where the hell are we? And and what's going on? Please, sir. Fletcher took a deep breath. They watched the horse ribs inflate. I can tell you where you are, and maybe I can tell you where you were. Fletcher pulled out his walkie talkie, put it on speaker, and placed it on the table. Yes, sir? Asked a voice. Mr. Darnley, I have a question for you to research. I'm with two fellows who want to know what zone they were in. It, or part of it, is called Bariad Torgon, about 5 passages from here, includes chilly mountainous country. Elfholds ruling populations of unmarked fays, talking dogs for soldiers in some, no mortals in evidence, but that's uncertain. Open finite with border passages, at least one into chaos marches. The celestial pole is in Orion, and the sun and moon are undersized. Is that enough to go on? I don't place the name, sir, but it sounds like zones in the Cadmon cluster off Gavura. They have skies like that, and it's the right distance. Fletcher smiled and said softly, didn't even have to look anything up. Go Charlie Horse. We may never have sent an expedition to that particular zone, sir, the voice went on, but we passed through the cluster about 15 years ago and collected local accounts. I'll look into it. Any more names, sir? Other places? Rulers? It's one passage from a place called Gairlad, and I may have more details for you later. Thank you, Mr. Darnley. He hung up. Do you have anything like a big sheet of paper? He asked. The Catmen produced a local newspaper, the ink so faint the marks of Fletcher's pen overruled it easily. Enerath, Middle Earth, the home zone, connects to many other places, other zones. Most are much smaller, islands or small continents. Some seem to be whole parallel worlds, though there's a new theory that they are somehow ingredients of our own world. Which world, Captain? Doug asked. Where is Grand Normandy? I meant Enerath, Earth, your world and mine. I live in England, lad. But Grand Normandy is hidden, a cryptic nation. I'll explain later. The home zone connects to other zones, which connect to each other, and it forms a network. By now, Fletcher had drawn a circle marked home and was adding more. Part of it is a string of zones we call the Road to the Sun. It has 3 lanes or branches. Here's Yasad, and then off to the left branch, Hod, and then Gavura. He sketched in more circles, totaling 10, and connected them, but did not label any more. I've seen that diagram, Doug said. Very possibly, Fletcher agreed. He was adding smaller circles near Gavura. There are little byways off the road to the sun to lesser zones. Here's the Cadmon cluster that Darnley mentioned, and somewhere in there is your Bariad Torgon. Don't know where Gairlad is yet, but you are now in Varsis in the Hathor passages to Netzach. He labeled a big circle Netzach and a smaller neighbor Varsis. We came here by sea passages on the Bethos through Hod and Yasad from Bekel. He made and labeled a little circle next to the home circle. And from Bekel, you can march home. He thickened the lines marking his route while the young soldiers stared. Gus placed a fingertip on the Varsis circle. You are here, he murmured reverently. Holy crow. Doug caught Fletcher's glance. He used to swear like any soldier, but we all got more religious while we were enslaved. Foxholes, no atheists. I mean, here we were in another dimension, transformed by a wicked fairy. God's not that hard to believe in then, and maybe he seems closer. And with the hive mind, we all got more religious. That's how it took him. Gus looked a little sheepish. I just got to feeling it was rude, calling on God and Jesus like that and mixing their names up with dirty words when I was asking them for real help. So he picked a minced oath and turned it into a habit. How did it take you? Fletcher asked Doug. Doug seemed to study the map intently. I wasn't raised religious, but I started praying. I still do. I'm just not sure who to. Fletcher smiled gently. I believe the message routing is excellent. Doug looked up. Are you religious? He asked. I'm a Christian. Fletcher dug in his collar and pulled out a small silver crucifix, which he displayed, kissed, and replaced. Avenese Catholic in particular, though I don't suppose you've ever heard of that branch of the church. Doug stared at him curiously. No offense, but how does a centaur wind up Christian? Fletcher smiled. The question is, how does a Christian wind up centaur? I'm a transformation, like you. All centaurs are, as far as we know. I volunteered for this shape when I was 20. Gus shook his head. You used to be human? I thought you were, your own race, like elves. We thought that too in Grand Normandy until 1943. I can tell you the history sometime. But I'm human, equine now, too, of course, and mortal. Good for a few decades more, but mortal. So what are we? Gus asked. Fletcher took another long, slow breath. As far as I know, there is no race that looks like you. I think she just made up your form. Partly, yes, she was transforming you to make you better fighters, but a lot of these details are cosmetic. She could have given you armor instead of crocodile hide or brass knuckles instead of those spurs. Did she say the tails were to improve your balance? They nodded. Maybe. But the main reason for the changes, I think, was to make sure you were always fighters, always on duty, always her fighters, made by her. It was to claim you and intimidate you and tear you away from your own old lives. Are you saying she just deformed us? Doug asked. That we're still human? Fletcher rose and wheeled. Clearly, if there had been room, he would have paced. Human is one of those words that takes several meanings when the context gets bigger. He looked at their doubtful expressions. You did ask for a teacher. Back in the Mond Minor, in your old world, human meant that you were born of the Homo sapiens species, and that your body was standard for that species or near it, and that you were a mortal child of Adam, because everybody is all three of those things. Now, here we are in the Mond Major, the larger world. He looked toward the window to the harbor where, in a month, the Bessos would sail away through the edge storm into chaos. None of us three has a body anyone would look at and say human. I'm human tissue here and equine tissue here. He patted man chest, then horse shoulder. You lads are probably still human tissue throughout, simply because she wouldn't bother to, say, rewrite your DNA. Your war lady and warlord and their servants and the little folk you trained were all human in those senses too, in all probability. Genus Homo, at least. Human anatomy and tissue and DNA, but they were fays, not mortals. It's a different metaphysical state. Your friends the dogs were also fays, or so I expect. Right now, they have canine anatomy and tissue and all the rest, but they may have been biologically human before, and may be biologically human again. Doug looked thoughtful. I should be taking notes, he muttered. What are we, sir? Gus asked. When Fletcher did not answer immediately, his ears went down and his tail lashed. We are orcs, aren't we? He snarled. You are not orcs, Fletcher thundered, rearing. His shoes struck sparks from the stone floor as he came down. The lads flinched. All three of them mumbled sorry at the same time. Gus's was a sorry, sir. Fletcher then asked Doug, what are you sorry for? He shrugged and returned to the issue at hand. What are orcs, sir, if we're not? It's a term of abuse, really. Or you could say it means ugly, vicious, unmarked common fays. He poked Doug in the chest. He poked Gus in the chest. You're a son of Adam, you're not vicious, and you're not ugly. You just look unusual. So don't call yourself an orc. Yes, sir, said Gus softly. He looked calmer, even gave Fletcher a rueful smile. It occurred to Fletcher that Gus had introduced himself as captain, so all these sirs the lads had been tossing into his accustomed ears were not really in order, but right now he thought they could use an authority figure. What's unmarked, sir? Gus asked. Deliberately, Fletcher sat down on the rug again. The two lads relaxed a little more. Common fays divide into marked and unmarked. The unmarked ones don't have full language or abstract thought. The ones that received Adam's mark do. The unmarked ones aren't really morally responsible. The marked ones are. That's more important than what they look like, and they come in a huge variety of forms. Most don't look like physically standard humans. Sounds like our little guys, said Gus. Fletcher nodded. So what are we, sir? He persisted. Fletcher stared back at them. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He rose again, turned in place again, and wished he could pace. It's bad news, said Doug. I've seen it in his face ever since we told him about the hive mind. And we'll get the bad news next time.